Hello, welcome to this Monday's This Is Not Therapy Hour. My name is Marie Moran. I am an executive functioning coach with Effective Artistry, and I'm joined by Brandon Tassers, LCPC, Clinical Director of Effective Artistry, and Caitlin Miller, LPC, Therapist with Effective Artistry. Hello.
Hello,
Happy
how are
Monday.
you?
How you doing? For anybody joining us for the first time, the show is called This Is Not Therapy, but it's a chance for you to talk to and learn from two therapists, Brandon and Caitlin, about anything to do with mental health and neurodiversity, anything that's on your mind. So if you've got questions or comments or thoughts, feel free to pop them in the chat and we'll do our best to answer them during this stream. Effective Artistry is a therapy and coaching practice based in Northbrook, Illinois, primarily therapy based as it is now. It's a neurodiversity affirming practice with therapists licensed to work with anyone in the state of Illinois. And there are a couple of coaches on the team as well, myself included, and we can work with you anywhere you are in the world. I think that's it for intros. So how you doing both?
Good. Doing all right. How are you?
A little sad.
Yeah.
Oh yeah?
I'm happy to
What's been
be here. Just working on authenticity. I don't know if that's the right word to use.
How are you doing, Marie?
I'm all right, thank you. Yeah, I'm doing okay. We didn't meet last week, so it's nice to be back with you both this week.
Yeah, and I wanted to apologize really quickly. I decided to cancel the stream at the last minute last week, and then went through the process of putting up a whole like banner and an announcement and whatever. And then you have to click the go live button twice, and I only clicked it once and didn't realize. So there was no announcement. There was just no stream last week. So sorry for anybody that was looking for it.
But we're here now.
Yes, we are here
We
now.
are here now.
So, what's on your minds this week? What have you been thinking about, or
So many.
So many things.
Something that's been coming up a lot with me and the work that I've been doing a lot lately is how wildly inaccurate people are about how other people perceive them. Just kind of generally, how we don't really seem to have much of a sense of how other people perceive us, which makes sense.
mm-hmm.
I'm just throwing things out.
I'm
there
becoming more conscious of how much of an impact that can make. Because I think for a while I thought of it as more of like a construct in my head, like my barometer is quite off. And so you just kind of have to correct it over time, but the implications on behavior and relationships is kind of a lot.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's like, you're behaving in a way that would be optimal or make the most sense if people perceived you the way that you think that they perceive you.
And then when you're wildly off.
Yeah, sometimes it is a big impact and you end up having the opposite effect of what you intended. Sometimes it doesn't make a difference. What you're doing goes forward just fine either way.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's been coming up a lot. I don't know, lots of things have been coming up a lot.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny because we work with people who identify as neurodivergent, and we neurodivergent people in general tend to think and worry a lot about how other people perceive us.
Yeah, and for the most part, we wouldn't worry about it as much as we do if we had a more accurate idea of how people perceived us.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I do think this is one of those things. There are a lot of things, or at least there are some things about various different experiences that are definitely, like, at least as people report it, but also in how we observe it, is different from one person to the next. Where the underlying thing is actually universal, but it's other variables that change the impact. And in this particular case, sometimes it's just how aware you are, right? Like, if you believe that you are always saying exactly what you mean and that everyone always interprets and understands what you mean exactly the way you meant it, you're just wrong. That's not true. It doesn't happen for anybody all the time. But some people believe it anyway. So they're just not very aware of the fact that people are going to interpret them differently And then there are people who are more aware of the fact that that's going to happen. It happens either way at different rates and whatever. But that the level of awareness you have about a thing can definitely change how you feel about it, how it impacts you. And this is one of those things, that nobody, I think, really understands how. I don't think we're capable of truly understanding how other people perceive us.
Mhm.
You can get enough that it's useful, but we're going to be off, as we would be off if you try to model anything that another person thinks or feels. You're not going to get it 100%. But some people are very aware of the fact that other people seem to see us differently than we see ourselves, and therefore spend a lot more of our resources on trying to figure that out. Some people are aware of it but aren't really bothered by it. Some people aren't very aware of it. Some people are aware of it but think it's on the other people for misinterpreting them.
Mhm.
But yes, I agree. Neurodivergent people who identify as neurodivergent, we tend to be very aware of the fact that we don't understand how other people see us, and we're fascinated by it.
Yeah. What about you, Caitlin? What's been coming up
I
for
just have
you?
so many things I want to say. When Brandon was just talking, it was like, great. I have so many ideas, but I didn't know where to begin. Yeah. I feel like part of one of the variables I was thinking of that I did not track, you said, but you may have said, is the degree to which the barometer is off, of which, in which.
Two.
Okay, there we go. Whew. So, yeah, I was thinking about that.
Yeah.
And then another thing I thought of, I was trying to think of some sort of joke of like, is neurodiversity just a keen awareness of existential issues of having a body and consciousness, and just being more aware causes us more distress? But then I feel like there's the next level of development, which is like, cool, this is kind of a gift that we're aware of these things, and maybe we can have it cause us less distress, and then we can change the world.
Yeah, like all of that. And I think you're right. I think that is an important variable, is how far off are you? And of course, we can like sum it up, and it's useful to sum it up as, like as though it's a simple thing. But if you really get,
It's quite context
like,
dependent.
I might be pretty spot on about how people perceive me in this particular regard, or about how this person or these people perceive me, and way off in this other way. You might have an accurate or fairly accurate understanding of how people view you physically, but are wildly off in how you think people view you in terms of your sense of humor. You think that everyone thinks you're dull when everyone thinks you're hilarious, or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it does tend to be in that direction, right? Especially with people who identify as neurodivergent. It does tend to be that we think people think worse of us than they actually do, more so than we think that they think better of us than they actually do.
Yeah. Usually.
In fact, a lot of the time we are very terrified that we might be thinking people think better of us than they actually do.
Well, and that's also an interesting paradox too when you start getting out of the inaccuracy of the barometer. Like, what do I do with this new thing that technically is better, but I don't know how to deal with it? And that reminds me of like environments with homeostasis and adding an element and then the homeostasis shifting. I feel like at one point you corrected me on this metaphor and I'm forgetting the correction.
What you're talking about is equilibrium, technically. I wouldn't have said that now, but since you're asking, homeostasis is the process, equilibrium is the state.
Okay, so it would be an environment is at a state of equilibrium, and then a new element gets introduced, and then through a homeostatic process,
For the homeostasis process. Yeah.
then it enters a new equilibrium.
Well, it responds to that perturbation in an attempt to get back. I'm using like the actual jargon here.
But it doesn't go back to the
In
equilibrium.
an attempt to get
An
back
attempt.
to equilibrium. Equilibrium, when it comes to humans especially, is not a actually attainable thing. It's more just like a model.
Yeah.
Equilibrium means, in this case, a state which could be sustained indefinitely without any outside influence, right?
Yeah.
That when a
Which
system,
literally doesn't happen in the universe at all, but I would really like that. It would be
Yes.
really nice.
The
well,
goal is like a steady state, but it might be different from where you were before the change happened. So it's like when
Can
we
I
talk
just-
about burnout.
Yeah. Can I confirm that you're saying that the second equilibrium after it is different than the first? Like if someone were to observe that system, they would say this is still the same system, but with a slight change.
if we're talking about humans, then yes, always, because nothing can be exactly the same moment to moment.
Mm-hmm.
But that's why it's the attempt. Like equilibrium is the goal state that the system is aiming for.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't actually ever get there
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to humans.
Okay, I think I'm getting it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Because I
But-
think about that all the time, so it's a nice thing to clarify.
Yeah, I think that's one of the like more common things I'll do with people, especially early on when I work with them, is switch around their scales. By the time I'm working with somebody, it's almost always been that they have worked with a bunch of other people and have been looking for something. And because I unfortunately am not super easy to find, which is something that Caitlin is.
I would
helping
like
to work
Brandon
on.
to be easier to find.
So by the time someone puts in the effort to find me, like they have good reason to. They've already tried working with people that were much easier to find.
Yeah.
And so they'll usually come in, more often than not anyway, with some idea of scaling, what we call scaling, which just means, on a scale of 1 to 10, how do I feel in such and such way or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I'll do very frequently at the beginning is reverse their scale.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because of what you were just talking about, right? We have this idea that there is such a thing as equilibrium, that there is this like perfect resting state, and that as long as nothing comes in to disturb us or nothing goes wrong, then we'll be at this perfect, sustainable, relaxed state. And so people will say, if you're talking about anxiety, for example, the scales that people usually get is 1 to 10, 10 being the most anxious
Mm-hmm.
and 1 being the least anxious.
Mm-hmm.
And I switched that because putting the numbers that way, it reinforces this idea that baseline, 0, if you're doing nothing, is calm and content and happy. And that the more anxious you become, the more out of the norm things are.
Mm-hmm.
And you just kind of got to get things
Now
out of
I
your
feel
way.
like society's baseline is a 5 out of 10 in that
Well,
scale.
Sure. I always work with people to set a negative side and a positive side
Yeah.
because, baseline is, we're going to say 0 is neutral, which is, we all have these connections, these connotations made with numbers and words and ideas. So, if we're going to do that, then I'm going to say that the most anxious is negative 10
Mm-hmm.
and the least anxious is 0, sure. But the most happy is positive 10. But I often won't even go that far, at least at first, and like introduce the negatives and positives. At first, I'll just have them use the scale they're used to using, but swap it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I can say this shocking thing that helps it helps it be remembered. Is everyone thinks that 0, like the default human state, is contentment. But no, the default human state is death. Like, the amount of things which must be happening in a very particular way in order for you to even be alive, much less to experience calm or satisfaction or contentment, much less happiness or excitement or pleasure. I mean, you have trillions of cells in your body, each of which are doing very specific things. And if any of them starts to mess up in certain ways, like, it can cause real problems. Everyone has this idea that it's supposed to be easy to be happy, and therefore if they're not happy, they must be doing something wrong, because if they weren't doing something wrong, then they would just by default be happy. Mm-hmm. But the truth is that a lot of stuff has to go into someone being happy.
Do you think you could describe the default human state?
Well, literally death.
Well,
It is. I mean,
So-
if you don't eat food, if you don't, you know, what I mean, like you do need constant input into the system.
then I'm wondering, maybe another way to put it is, for a human being who is alive, what would you say? I want to use the
What
word
are you trying to
baseline now.
ask? You're
I
trying to
just-
ask for like a minimal acceptable standard, or
No, I guess my thought is that, like, if the average human was in so much agony all the time, we wouldn't want to live enough to actually. So I feel like there has to be some version of, like, undulating nervous system. Does that make sense?
it does. And just to point out that this is not new or unique, certainly to me, but you know, certain philosophical and religious approaches will straight up say life is suffering,
Mm.
life is pain, and there's truth to that.
Yeah, I think if we are supposed to be incentivized to procreate and not end our own lives, there has to be some level of, I wouldn't say like enjoyment or enlightenment or pleasure or happiness, but some,
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe a positive apathy.
The the more practical answer to your question is that, in terms of like nervous system and whatever,
Mhm.
is that happiness is relative. That
Mhm.
that we evaluate things and respond to things based on how they compare to other things of which we are aware. Does that make sense? Like right now,
Yeah, no, that does, yeah.
if you know, I have my specific things. That's just like the first way I did it when I did it with somebody, and have it locked in my head that way and do it over and over. So this is my way of doing this one. Is I'll ask people, are you very anxious right now about the fact that you cannot fly through the air by just willing yourself to fly through the air? Like, do you spend a lot of time ruminating over your inability to do that and think that there must be something wrong with you, that you're doing something wrong? And of course, no. Sometimes people will be like, man, I do wish I could fly. I'm sad I can't fly. But you don't actually spend a lot of time thinking about it.
Mhm.
But if you believed, if I could get you to believe, genuinely believe that everybody else does that and you're the only one that doesn't, then all of a sudden you're going to spend a lot of time thinking about
Mhm.
what the hell is wrong with you, what's going on, why can't you do this thing?
Yeah.
And the only thing that changed in that scenario is your awareness, your belief about what is possible, what is normal, what is easy. That's why I'm pushing on this,
Mhm.
because people believe that being happy is just easy, or that it's supposed to be, and that for most people it is, that most people are just happy all of the time,
Mhm.
or the vast majority of the time. And because they believe that, and they know that that's not their experience, they spend a lot of their time, a lot of their energy sitting and ruminating over what the hell is wrong with me? Why am I not happy all the time like other people? So your question, yes, there is a middle ground, right? That like the more you have difficult and painful and stressful experiences, the more it shifts so that things which were less, you know, which used to be much more uncomfortable are now less uncomfortable because compared to what it could be.
Yeah.
And same that the first, you know, every time you have an experience that's even better than any you've had before, then your previous best experience is now like
Mhm.
80% of your best.
Mhm.
And it shifts over time. This is part of the zone of proximal development stuff.
Mhm. Mhm.
Like there's a time in your life when you would have been where you probably were so proud of yourself and so happy and excited that you could read.
Mhm.
And now that means nothing to you.
Yeah.
So as our experience grows, but not only our own experience, our awareness, our belief about what humans do and other humans, especially what's normal or average.
Yeah.
There's a reason that people who identify as being neurodivergent talk so much about how they're different from the norm. There's so much talk about the neurotypicals that don't actually exist,
Mhm.
because we have this idea of I'm here, but everybody else is here. And if we shifted it into thinking, no, I'm here and everyone else is here, then it changes how you feel and what you do. Which isn't to say that people don't have the problems that they have. We do. We are
Oh,
actually
totally,
different from
yeah.
one another.
Yeah.
That's
would like to validate that
Yeah.
for anyone listening.
it's not made up. We are all different, and we have our own particular patterns and strengths and weaknesses and tendencies and whatever.
Marie, I wanted to ask you, I was curious about the point you were making about burnout. I think at that point we were talking about an environment and then the homeostasis and then like coming back to an equilibrium. Like I think you said something about burnout.
Oh yeah, well, so something I hear commonly about burnout is that you never like there's all this, there's an idea of there's a baseline, but after every successive burnout, the baseline is different. So you might come back to a state of equilibrium, but it's different to the prior state. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So are you saying, like, would an example of that be that if someone feels like they have been burnt out?
Burnt out.
Burnt out. Sorry.
Either one is fine.
That if people have been burnt out like multiple times in their life, like let's say 20, 25, 30, 35 or something like that, that each state of burnout, their baseline would decrease to get back.
Yeah,
to
I guess like
equilibrium?
your tolerance level for what might trigger another episode is your threshold is lower. Yeah, lower, not higher. So
Yeah.
if there's a, I don't know if it's universally true, but there seems to be for a lot of people a pattern that the more burnouts you have, the easier it is to fall back into burnout, unless you put measures in place to prevent or postpone another episode.
That's really interesting that that's how people are talking about it, because I think burnout is a huge thing that is going around.
Yeah.
It's a similar conversation like around chronic illnesses like long COVID and ME, CFS, those kind of things that, you know, you might get to a place where you feel, okay, things are manageable now, but another episode will set you back and it's harder to bounce back the next time. So yeah, I guess it's not quite what we were talking about, but it's same ballpark, talking about returning to a state of equilibrium.
I think it is very relevant to what we were talking about.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to highlight it and circle back to it.
Yes, people do talk about this, you know, that like your new normal is different than the normal before. And yes, when people talk about it, it's almost always to say your new normal isn't as good in some way as the old normal was. And I think that there are reasons for that, and some to just point out. Like one, for example, is that if you go through a period of being burnt out for 2 years and then you quote unquote come out of it, and all of these are like concepts, right? Like being burnt out and not being burnt out is just a label we're applying to something very complicated, but you recover from it. And now your new baseline, you still don't have as much energy as you did before you burnt out. Well, you're also 2 years older.
Yeah, I was that age.
It's hard to separate out, like, would you still be feeling, would this be your new normal at this point, even if you hadn't been burnt out or not? And I would say, I mean, there's not a lot of point in the hypothetical, because one of the things that happens that in particular with burnout, I think makes it true that as you think about these things and talk about these things, that it does get more likely for you to slip back into them, in part because with burnout in particular, awareness is involved. You have to be not only feeling a certain way, but aware that you are feeling a certain way.
And for neurodivergent people, does that usually mean that it's pretty bad if you're aware of it?
Well, it just means if you're burnt out, then kind of almost by definition, you didn't notice it coming on, right? Like you didn't realize how bad things were until they were really bad. And part of what you had to do in order to get out of being burnt out, to recover from it, was to learn to pay attention to these things and notice your own feelings of tiredness and whatever, and adapt and plan around them. And so then when you come back for whatever work you go through, you recover from it.
Mhm.
You are, again, pretty much by definition, much more aware of being tired or depleted or overwhelmed whenever it happens than you were beforehand.
Mhm.
That's necessary and beneficial because it means that you won't push yourself, or at least you're less likely to push yourself as hard as you pushed yourself before.
Mhm.
But it does also mean that compared to before, you don't remember feeling exhausted and overwhelmed and stressed out like this, which of course you weren't as aware of it, so you won't remember it. And now you're much more aware of it.
I also think about clients who, and I relate to this to a certain extent, where maybe they have a period of time where the demands in their life or their like output, or there's so many things to call it, but is like moderate for them, and they're like, oh, that was really when I was happy. And I'm like, well, what's different now? Well, now I have 2 kids and a full-time job and a chronic illness, and so I also think the context, where am I going with this, Brandon?
I think you're talking about not taking into account, like,
Oh, yeah,
noting the
context,
change in
yeah.
how you feel.
Mm.
Yeah, just the importance of context. Like when I think about my life, oh my god, it gets so complicated.
Oh yeah.
Oh, it's so complicated. One of the things I was thinking of though when you were talking, Brandon, is like sort of the grief involved in being burnt out, feeling better, and feeling better than before burnout. So almost like 2 steps higher or 2 steps forward in Monopoly, and then doing like 4 steps back with another burnout, but then just going 1 step forward, and you're still negative 1 steps from when you were like 3 years ago. And it's just like, oh, I know I can make this better. So I think that's hard, which is kind of the opposite of what Marie's talking about, where like does that make
Actually,
sense?
I think it's the same. It's part
Yeah.
of the cycle.
Yeah.
Because
So,
you're so concerned, you're so sure that it could be better than what it is, then you're upset at yourself for being what you are and keep trying to make changes
Mhm.
and pushing yourself to make changes. But that's also just improvement, right? Like,
Mhm.
that's what people theoretically are always attempting to do every single moment of our lives, is trying to identify of everything that we're aware of or could be aware of, what seems to be important and what seems to be a relevant marker of something, and the things that we don't like, we try and figure out what to do to change them and make them better, and things that we do like, we try and get more of.
I was thinking of that. I've been listening to some of my opera recordings that I did when I was like, I don't know, 17 to 21. And I remember listening to them and being like, that vowel's a little off. That doesn't quite sound like Maria Callas. Oh, I didn't really like that facial expression. That body language could have changed. Oh, it doesn't even sound like French, but the tone is okay. And that high note was too, blah, blah, blah. And then I'm listening to it and I was like, why didn't I enjoy it more when I was like, but it reminds me of like my friend and I, who he's like a coach and composer and stuff, so he's not a singer, but we talk about the opera industry in that way, where someone can have an amazing performance and they're like, oh, the high note was a little flat. I just don't even know if I should get paid to do this anymore. It's like, oh.
Yeah.
But that reminds me of the improvement, like any sort of skill, the more skilled you become, it's like, oh, well, that was.
We were talking about this in supervision last week. I guess you weren't there for a lot of
Yeah, I
supervision.
wasn't. I was pretending to be.
That if you care to get better at something,
Mhm.
that means that sometimes you will feel like you are bad at that thing.
Yeah.
You would have to be identifying some things that you're doing that you're saying, no, that should be better or could be better,
Mhm.
in order to improve them.
I've been noticing that so much in myself, and I try to just say things to myself like, you're already pretty okay at this, or you already enjoy it, or like, it's like, this is just about improvement, and you don't actually really need to improve. Like, it's not all necessary.
Sure. And that definitely helps with some anxiety and perfectionism and stuff
context.
sometimes, yeah. But sometimes, no, you want to get better. To me,
Yeah.
I try and tell people there's nothing wrong. Actually, this is something Andy used to talk about. I'm sure still does. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be perfect, with aiming for that. The problem is when you feel as though you have done something bad for failing to achieve it.
Mhm.
There's nothing wrong with wanting to improve or be better. It's just when you're angry with yourself or beat yourself up as though you're doing something wrong for not having already been better.
Well, I think one of the things I'm talking about is not integrating pleasure and enjoyment in the process of getting better so much so that it like subsumes you.
Yeah.
So I do think there's and I'm not perceiving what I'm saying as counter to what you're saying,
No, I
but
don't
like
either.
enjoying the parts of the process too.
I mean, this is one of the reasons that I attack the idea of motivation so much, because I think that's one of the core premises that causes people problems in our culture, is this belief that if only you felt worse, you would be doing more.
Yeah.
You know, that, which is at its core. I just don't care enough. Like, people who are literally having panic attacks over their inability to do a thing, and then saying that the only problem is they don't care about doing that thing enough.
It's like you probably already care more than many people about doing well.
Yeah, we have a lot of systems built in and a lot of messages built in about punishment as motivation, and so we do it to ourselves.
And I think that's part of how I was pointing out, listening to the opera recordings, like listening to them for the flaws. So then in the moment of listening to them at that period in my life, it was like flaw finding versus.
Yeah, because you were actively focused on improving.
Yeah. But some of the irony of that, at least as an artist, is if you learn to kind of sink into the joy and the flow of it, sometimes those problems actually just kind of disappear.
Oh yeah. If you're monitoring and criticizing yourself as you're doing a thing, it always makes you do that thing worse.
Yeah.
Thinking and acting are opposite things. They're mutually exclusive things.
This is why I need to move my body more. I do. I'm doing it.
No, just the more you're thinking in anything, the less efficiently you are doing that. Like, that's literally what when we say be careful or I'm being careful. What we mean is I'm going way more slowly because I'm like doing a little bit and thinking, doing a little bit. I'm monitoring how it's going and adjusting as I get.
And even if you think of body language with careful too, like careful would be like slowing down, looking around the corner.
And honestly, one way of talking about the experience of people who identify as neurodivergent is being very, very careful, thinking about everything all the time, more than the average person would, or more than is always helpful. And it slows you down and it makes everything very cognitively taxing. But it also means that you make a lot fewer mistakes. You know, like if you are super anxious about falling off of a high place, you're much less likely to fall off of a high place than someone who isn't anxious about it. And some of that is because you're much less likely to go to a high place.
Or get as close to the edge, or wear the right shoes so you don't slip.
It can be so disproportionate that you just don't even leave your home.
Yeah.
But as long as you don't leave your home, you're 100% guaranteed not to fall from a high place. So the more you worry about something, the less likely it is that that thing happens. But it's about finding that balance of what's worth worrying about and to what extent. And
I guess that's why we're always trying to reach that flow state, that hyper focus state, because we're just doing, we're not thinking so hard about it. We're just in the moment doing the thing. So for a lot of people, you know, it's like, I wish I could achieve hyper focus. All my other ADHD friends say that they can hyper focus. I can't. Why not? Maybe it's because we're thinking too much about doing the thing.
Well, yes, for sure. And also monitoring whether or not you are experiencing hyperfocus
is going to break it.
It means that you're not in hyperfocus, because some of your resources are dedicated to monitoring yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, I spend a lot of time trying to shift people's ideas of what's possible, what's viable, what's normal, what's average, what's easy, what's hard. Because even if it is, in fact, it's even worse, the more accurate it is to make this statement. But if you are thinking there are things that are just so important and so easy for everyone else, but so difficult for me, then that's separate from the difficulty of the thing. Is an additional difficulty of thinking of yourself in that way, which doesn't mean that it's inaccurate. It just means that it's hard. And part of what identifying as neurodivergent, or what the neurodiversity philosophy is meant to accomplish, is to diminish how difficult and painful it is to think of yourself in that way. Even though the problem is still the problem, if you don't think of it as I should be different than I am, then you look at a bunch of different solutions and you behave much differently.
Yeah. I think people that I encounter who talk about that too, they might be quite good at a lot of things and then focusing on the ways that they would perceive they are not as good at, that neurotypical people are good at.
Mhm.
And so there's like, I don't know, do you think, Brandon, do you think that 2E exists?
I mean, in the way that any of
Because
these
that's what I'm
things
trying to
exist. It's a useful
reference.
construct, yes.
Yeah, that's
2E meaning twice exceptional, which means intellectually gifted or high IQ. So one exceptionality paired with ADHD or autism or learning disability, another exceptionality. That particular construct is meant to be, you're exceptional in a good way and in a bad way.
Mm-hmm.
And so, no, I don't think it's the most accurate way.
Yeah, I don't. What would be the edit on that you would encourage?
I mean, neurodiversity, honestly. You are what you are, and you're different in different ways and whatever, but we can't really separate those out, that some of them are great and some of them are terrible, except for how you experience them and how it impacts you.
Well, I would focus more on like not knowing how to tie my shoes makes it harder to put on shoes if they have laces.
Right.
But not like, I am so awful for not knowing how to tie my shoes, and how could I not know how to tie it? Like, all
Right, because if you think
know.
you're awful and that you should know or you should learn, then you keep wearing shoes with laces, which just doesn't work well for you and reminds you of your struggles and your difficulties every day. And if you think, no, I don't know how to tie shoes, but that's not a big problem, then you might just not get shoes that need to be tied, and the problem is solved either way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But that is a very common thing for people who identify as neurodivergent. Is something in my life is going differently than I would want it to be. It's an actual problem. An actual thing is happening that's difficult, painful, that I don't like, whatever. So the solution is I need to learn how to be different instead of I need to make changes so that I don't have to deal with that thing anymore.
Yeah.
Or I need to ask for help with this thing.
Right. Because that's another one of
We're
the
not
core
good at asking for help.
Yeah. Motivation is one of those core lies, specifically that punishment makes you do things, which it does. That's why the lie persists. It's not as all-encompassing as we talk about. But another one of the core lies is that hyper-individuality thing. You should do everything on your own.
Yeah.
If anybody thinks right now, think over your academic experience. There are some things you were really great at, and there are some things that you really struggled with, probably. That's not true for everybody, but most people can have at least one thing that'll fit into each category, right? And if I say, well, like of your energy, of the time you spent thinking about and working on and whatever, paying attention to something, how much of that, like of the 100% of the resources you had, what percentage of that were you spending on the stuff that you thought you were the worst at, that you struggled the most with, and therefore felt like you needed to improve the most? And how much did you spend on the stuff that you felt like you were the best at? And for the most part, especially people who identify as neurodivergent will say, no, I really focused in on like the things that I was failing at, which is the least efficient way. If I have a team of 5 people and each of them has different strengths and weaknesses, do I want each of them like focusing all their resources on the areas where they're the least efficient and effective?
Absolutely. A happy group of people.
The only reason that we incentivize people so strongly to focus on shoring up their weaknesses, paying most attention to whatever their shortcomings, whatever, is because it relies on this idea that you can't rely on anyone else, that you are the only one you can rely on, which at the, go extreme enough, and there's truth to that. Like, you're the only person you know you will always have access to. But that doesn't, again, that's like saying, well, if I never leave my house, I'll never get hit by a car. Yes, accurate, effective. But you're paying a higher cost than it really needs to be paid, probably. You could probably leave your house sometimes and still be safe to not get hit by a car, most likely.
Yeah.
So yeah, why do we, you know, there's that, it's like a famous, like stereotypical thing at this point where some kid in the class says, teacher, why do we need to learn math? And the teacher says, well, because you won't always have a calculator on you. Which everyone laughs at these days because obviously we all do have calculators on us all the time now with our phones. But aside
Sometimes
from that,
even our watches now, you just press a button,
true.
say Siri, what's 10 plus 10?
But aside
Just
from
trying to
even
answer
that,
10
now.
plus
Ah! This is an ad for Apple.
that's still not an answer. Even if we don't all have calculators, that would be like saying, well, you need to learn how to build a car because you won't always have the money to be able to buy one. Or whatever. You know, like, what is the scenario in which it would be necessary for me to either know how to do this math or have access to the calculator? Like, what is that I need to be doing?
Yeah.
And then it's hard to answer. And we can always say you do your taxes, but in reality, most people pay other people to do their taxes,
Mm-hmm.
which is how it's meant to be. Like, we don't actually all need to know advanced math.
Mm-hmm.
The number of people who spent so much energy, so much time and effort learning calculus in high school that never in the rest of their life ever used anything related to calculus.
Yeah.
So anyway,
And I'm thinking of when I used to work with more high schoolers, how they might be like, English brings them so much joy and they're reading these amazing novels and their analysis of the literature is great and they love their English teacher. And then in most of the sessions, it's like, I am so stupid. I'm so bad at math.
Yeah.
Yeah.
it goes back to the motivation thing, right? Like, the only way to get myself to learn is to think of how terrible I am for not already knowing. It just doesn't need to happen that way.
Well, and also, I don't know if this is exactly how you're trying to, this is not how exactly you're trying to communicate it. But about community, that it's okay for some people to find joy in certain things and also have skills in those certain things and then continuing to do those things and not having to do everything.
Yeah.
And then complementing each other.
I mean, that's,
As in E, complement.
well, yeah.
Complementary colors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To me, that's, again, one of the reasons I focus so much on what neurodiversity is meant to be versus the version of it that most people talk about, which is just the medical model with politically correct language on it.
Mm-hmm.
The point of neurodiversity is to say, no, you are valuable. Like, however you are is at least theoretically valuable to a human community, or there wouldn't be a version of a person that is like you.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, you are deficient at some things, but those are not the only important things.
Yeah.
But a lot of the time we tend to stop there. We see the neurodivergence and then we say, yep, so things are harder for me, without looking at the other side and say, well, what's the trade-off, right? Like, yes, it is harder for me. I don't cook. And at least part of that, I have realized in recent years, because we got higher countertops in our kitchen, I've realized that part of the reason I don't like to cook my whole life is because my back starts to hurt really badly within 5 minutes of bending over a normal height counter. Because now that I have a counter that's 3 inches higher, I actually am quite enjoying it. Which isn't to say that there's not other variables, but like, yeah, there are upsides and downsides to everything. So being the height I am makes it so that I haven't been as focused on or efficient at cooking and doing dishes. But it also makes it so that I'm much better at reaching things on a high shelf, which is, people have no problem asking me to reach things on a high shelf. But I've had a lot of problem with asking other people to do the dishes, even though my back hurts. I force myself to do it because that's polite and we take turns,
Rules.
Yeah.
Rules,
You were saying earlier
rules.
about you wish you could have appreciated at the time how you were singing. And that
Correct, Brendan.
I think plays in a lot to this. It's not,
Yeah.
I mean, there's specifics in opera, but youth is wasted on the young is a common phrase.
Yeah.
I mean, we all wish we knew how good we had it when we were young, but we didn't, and they don't either. And it's about what we're talking about. Until you get older and have less energy, you have no comparison for what it feels like to have more energy. Until you are somebody who, if you drink 2 drinks, is going to knock you out for the next day,
Mhm.
you don't have any appreciation for the fact that you would be able to go out all night and still get up the next morning and go to work.
Mhm.
Until you have both experiences, you can't compare them. And I do spend a good, I don't know, it frequently occurs to me of like, man, I wish I had the energy I had 20 years ago.
Mhm.
And very rarely do I think about how 20 years ago I was so stressed about finances and my career and my lack of relationships and what I was going to do with my life. And none of that
Check,
bothers
check,
me
check.
anymore. Right.
Yeah.
So it's that comparison thing, that awareness thing.
Yeah.
Like whatever thing we're struggling with, we compare that against our awareness of other people and how they're doing well at it, including other versions of ourselves, younger versions or alternative hypothetical versions that don't exist. We very rarely are like, oh, I'm so good at this thing, or this thing in my life is amazing. Man, let me think about that poor sap that was me 20 years ago and how much worse off he was in this way.
I've been trying to do that, but without the poor stuff.
Yeah, well, there's a reason we don't do it a lot.
There are things there.
Tons of things. In fact, again, one of the things I
This
try to
is why
point out.
everyone should move to Northbrook.
Everyone should move what?
To Northbrook. I just like making. I actually really like living in Northbrook, so that's why I feel entitled to make the jokes.
Northbrook is the town I live in and where our office is, and Caitlin moved here, 6 months ago or so,
Numbers.
something like that. And it is nice, but of course not perfect.
Was it 6?
I don't think it was that long actually. It was like May,
Less
right?
to be. Yeah, maybe.
No.
That's 6. 5 plus 6 is 11, and we're in the 11th.
Oh.
Wild.
There's a reason we don't do the comparisons that way. I want to make this point. Because otherwise, people will just judge themselves for not doing that. As you were just saying, I try to get myself to do that more. Like when I'm
Yeah.
happy, think about how it's better than. Not that that's not useful per se, but
I'm
there's a
not
reason.
thinking of it as an antidote to what you're saying.
Sure. When you're experiencing something bad, when you're having a problem, what are you incentivized to do is figure out how to change things so that it gets better. And what's one of the most common, if not the most common way to do that, is to look at examples of other people, especially other versions of yourself, who had solved this problem so that you can just copy from it. So yes, there's a solid inherent reason why when things are bad, we think about and pay attention to other people who it's good for them, including other versions of ourselves. When things are good for you, what's the point in thinking about how it used to be bad for you?
Yeah.
Which isn't to
Does
say you
this
should never do it, but
Sorry, does this explain, or at least partly explain, why we sometimes have a hard time seeing ourselves the way others see us? Because we're so focused on what's wrong,
yes,
what we think is wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
which is one of those universal things. Attentional processes, there's a lot to them, and there's a lot of, there are many variations as there are people, but there are some universal things. And one of those is negative stuff gets priority over positive stuff.
Yeah.
If there are 10 bushes in front of me and 9 of them you can eat from and it's good for you, but one of them, if you eat from it, you die, I'm going to be real aware of which one that one is.
Yeah.
And I'll only be aware of the others. And if you ask me later, like, hey, was there any poison bush there? I'll be like, yes, there was this one poison bush. And were there any non-poisonous bushes? Yeah, there were a bunch. How many? I don't know. A handful, 10 or so, a dozen or so, whatever.
1,000.
So I'll say, as I'm sure I've said on the stream a bunch, if you are in a room and there are 100 things in that room that could be noticed, but you can only notice 5 things at a time, and 3 of those things could kill you, you will notice 3 of those things, those 3 things. And the other 2 things you'll notice could be anything else from the other 97 things in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And so 3% of the things in that room could kill you. But once you leave that room, if someone says, what was it like in there? You can be like, 60% of the stuff in there could kill you. Because you can only remember the stuff that you notice.
Yeah.
And I know this sounds absurd. So another way to make this point for people is, in this moment right now, are you aware of any discomfort with how hot or cold you feel? Sometimes they are, but a lot of the time we're not.
Mhm.
And that's fairly unusual, right? Because
Yeah.
usually you could just get a blanket or
Mhm.
take off a sweater or whatever.
Yeah.
In this moment, are you aware of an uncomfortable hunger or sensation of being full? Not usually the case. Sometimes yes, but not usually. An uncomfortable need to use the bathroom, not usually the case. Why? Well, because we have controlled heating and cooling systems,
And
we have
toilets.
indoor plumbing,
Indoor plumbing.
and grocery stores and delivery. Like,
Yeah. When we were talking, this is a tangent, but when we were talking about happiness based in context, when we were just talking about plumbing, I was remembering going on a horseback ride in Cuba and going to a little, I don't even know, house, but essentially like three, whatever, whatever. And this person had a toilet that was just like a, what is it called? A pit in the ground or what? Just
a
like,
latrine?
no, it was like literally just a hole in the ground. And I remember looking at these people and asking and saying like, thank you so much that I can whatever. And they had this smile on their face that was just like radiant that I just, so I was thinking about like pleasure, happiness, contextual needs met, all of that stuff. And
It's all relative, yeah.
Yeah.
and again, that is not to try to the internet, but to try to like, I don't know what's the
You're not
word,
trying to-
invalidate people who have indoor plumbing who are also sad.
Well, right.
Yeah.
In fact,
Just to be clear.
so
Or to romanticize poverty.
right.
Yeah, it is not
neither way.
romantic.
Yeah.
Everybody's life
Yeah.
is different, and this thing we're talking about that we do for younger versions of ourselves,
Yeah.
we also societally, society does it with older versions of society, where we notice something new that's a problem that didn't used to be a problem, and we say this didn't used to be a problem, and we don't focus on the things that used to be problems but aren't anymore.
Mhm.
So a very big one that we're talking about a lot is, call it mental health, whatever, call it focused on your emotional state,
Mhm.
whatever. That people say everybody's depressed these days, everybody's neurodivergent these days, everybody's this and this and this these days, teens this and this and that. We didn't used to be like this. Yeah, what were you doing instead? Because honestly, this again is not to like make one thing sound good or bad or anything, just to point out the differences. Go camping and don't bring any supplies with you, and see how much of your time and energy you spend thinking about your emotional state or how rational or irrational your concerns are. You have no
We need shelter before it rains and gets dark.
right. You don't have resources left over to think about that. So was it better, or were we just not paying as much attention to it?
Yeah.
And every problem that humans pay attention to, by and large, we tend to make improvements.
It is 2 minutes until 2 because you said you wanted to
Thank
end on time.
Yeah, we're gonna end on that. Just humans are great at solving problems, both individually and collectively. We are terrible at revisiting existing solutions to see whether they're still useful or necessary or whether there's better options. But yeah, whatever problem we focus on, we tend to solve it or improve it, make gains in that area, which then just frees up our resources to notice the next problem. We do it as a species, but we do it as individuals too. That's part of why we're always going to be focused on the things we do the worst, or the things we care most about improving anyway. They're like, you accomplish something, and now it's accomplished, and now it's done, and now let's move on to the next problem. So yes, the problems we have now are, I would say, I'm talking about like culturally, whatever, are better problem. I don't know if better is the right, but these are the problems that you have when you resolve the problems you've resolved. We have resolved a lot of things, and then new problems pop up. I think there's a reason that people who are struggling, especially with these kinds of things, will often say things like, I wish I could just live in the woods alone, or I wish I could isolate from humanity, or why people will like fantasize about zombie apocalypses and stuff. Because then it's like, oh, imagine this scenario in which all the things that I'm worried about, I wouldn't be worried about anymore. And I'm not really thinking about the fact that I would most likely be dead or about to die or constantly worried about dying, but I wouldn't have to worry about my grades, and that would be awesome. you know.
And on that note, thank you for coming.
Yeah, there's no
you
solution
for
to most of this. But the
Yeah.
thing that help to focus on is wanting to be better or wanting something in your life to be better than it is. Acknowledging that you or something in your life is something that you don't want. Does not have to equate to you are bad and you should feel bad about it. You can want to be better without feeling bad about what you are. You can want to solve problems in your life without feeling bad about the fact that you have them. That's all. There's always going to be stuff to work on. We're always going to notice our shortcomings. You just doesn't mean you're a bad person.
No. And don't feel bad about asking for help either.
Yeah. Feeling bad does not help you get more stuff done. Honestly, I think some of the most burnt out people, some of the most neurodivergent, whatever we would mean by that, the most depressed, whatever, are the people who go the farthest before giving up on this idea that feeling bad gets you to do more stuff.
Yeah.
It's a cycle that I'm struggling. So maybe if I feel even worse, then I'll do better. Nope, I'm feeling even worse. And I'm feeling even worse now because feeling worse should have resulted in me doing more, but it didn't. So man, something really must be wrong with me. And now I feel worse and I'm doing even less and I'm worse and less. That if you want to think about quote unquote neurotypical people or normal people or whatever and how they're successful, try to think those neurotypical people don't feel bad about asking for help. If you want to find a difference, that's the one. That they're still misunderstood. They just don't feel bad or like they're a bad person or at fault for being misunderstood. Some people still don't like them. They just don't feel bad about being somebody that some people don't like. They still make mistakes. They still forget things. They just don't feel bad about it. Feeling bad makes things worse, not better. Feeling more bad is never a sign of improvement.
No, never. I wish I could sprinkle the Brandon fairy dust all around the world. Oh wait, that's what I'm trying
We're
to
trying.
Oh,
We're here on Mondays.
ready. We are gearing up.
Are we? That makes me very nervous. Excited?
Well, you're excited.
Yes, I'm excited. You're
Wait,
right.
no. Sorry, you
No,
have
you're
your
right.
own feeling.
You're right.
Are you excited?
You are right. That's a good. I am excited. Not nervous. I'm excited.
Marie, I wish you lived in Northbrook.
It'd be nice to hang out sometime. Yeah.
Yeah, we could
Cool to meet in person.
bread,
Yeah.
your baked bread, like 10 minutes out of the oven instead of across the ocean.
We'll just open a UK office. We'll all go over there.
I want to.
You want to live in the pastoral version of the English countryside that exists in your mind?
Yes, exactly.
Is there English countryside that's as pastoral as the like American idea of it is?
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah. I've been to some.
I'm
Yeah.
thinking
beautiful
United
parts.
Kingdom countryside. Just.
Fair enough.
I saw pictures.
Where you just wear sweaters all year long.
Oh, the Scottish Highlands you would love. Scottish
what?
Highlands.
Yeah,
December
right.
knit sweater.
Yeah.
June knit sweater.
I love this.
Me too. I'm in the right
You're
place.
great. I feel so relieved that it's colder. Oh my god.
That's like the entirety of my mental image of Ireland is like, oh, cable knit sweaters. That's it. Always cable knit sweaters.
And
Right.
Guinness and potatoes.
And
Yeah.
this was fun.
Nice to see you.
Yeah, it was. Good to see you both.
Good to be
Um,
with you.
Thank you all for being here, everybody who was here. Sorry about last week.
Thank you, everyone.
We'll see you next week. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.